Very good morning and good evening to all of you. Hope you are having a great time here. So today in our video, we are basically going to explore threat hunting on cloud. So we are basically ingesting CloudTrail in our Splunk environment, and we will be exploring more onto that, right? So uh, this video revolves around we'll try to give you an opportunity to get little familiar with getting the basic understanding how does the CloudTrail look like, and we will start from there on. So the agenda, so this will be a short video, and we'll be talking about making the sense of CloudTrail in Splunk, and we will be looking at some of the SPL searches which SOC analyst or cloud analyst may want to leverage on day-to-day basis. And then we will also talk about some of the tactics and techniques in a brief, because the detailed tactics and technique we will be covering in the subsequent parts, right? So without any delay, let's get started. I will be moving on to the Splunk environment. So for example, in my case, so for example, let's get to the home page, and we will start from there. It will take a moment. So source type for me would be a CloudTrail 2. So normally the source type should be in your environment should be AWS CloudTrail. So this is the source type, and I'm also using this particular source type to ingest real-time logs in my AWS Cloud account, and which we will be exploring in the subsequent parts. But however, today I am going to make the use of some of the logs which are residing in this particular source type. And since this is a static data, I will be using all time, and let's search. So it will take a moment. So as I said, this video revolves around and talks more about the basic understanding, how just to understand how does the CloudTrail logs look like, and then we will go from there. So you can see that the events are started getting populated in our user interface, and so for example, let's start. You can see there are some of the default fields are already there. So for example, I will be talking about some of the interesting fields. So with respect to our raw data, you can see that these are the regions in which we have used for our environment. Event category, you can see two types of the data: management events and data events. So most probably in your environment, you will see the management related events. The data related events correspond to let's say the events which basically talks about, let's say, the changes being made to the objects which are residing in one particular bucket, or configuration changes to those objects residing in the bucket, right? So those are data related events, and they are pretty much, but the way most of the enterprise configure the CloudTrail, they basically concerned about management related events. So we'll talk about event name. You can see that these are some of the event names which we'll be focusing on. So this is very, very important to understand, and this will give us the visibility what is actually happening in our environment. What are the activities that are being carried out by which user principals or AWS services, right, for that matter. So event source, so the events are basically originating from let's say the AWS native services. So you can see the EC2, you can see key management services, RDS, event time, of course, at which particular time that event or that action has taken place. So I will go I will scroll down a bit. And you can see, so in the recipient account ID, you can see that there must be somewhere around 8 AWS accounts with respect to our raw logs, and I will talk more about those. So for and some of other fields which might be of our interest are the source IP address. You can see that some of the events originated from AWS native services like EKS, Amazon, auto-scaling, and there are some of the public IP address range, and there might be the corporate IP address range as well, right? So if I click on user agent, so this also gives us the visibility, if you are really making the use of AWS SDK or your CLI or your console for that matter, right? Now I will be talking about the most important field, which is nothing but user identity.arn. This is quite a comprehensive field which gives you the visibility or about which particular user principles or service for that matter are assuming the role or carrying out these activities. So for example, in the very first case, you can see ARN AWS STS. So STS is nothing but security token service. So this basically corresponds if somebody is really generating the temporary credentials. And so you might be knowing, or all the AWS folks might be knowing, temporary credentials can stay valid up to the maximum of 36 hours, and it's generally a good practice to use or to assume the role by the AWS service or federated principles, rather than making the use of IAM users, right? So you can see here that so this is the role which one of the principle is assuming. So Kubernetes admin is one of the role which is being assumed by one of the principles, which is some extremely large number, which might correspond to one particular entity. So in the second case, again, you can say that, again, the role is being assumed, and auto scaling in our case might be, one of the entity which might be assuming this role, AWS service role for auto scaling, right? And in the third case, you can see, in this particular case, we are talking about the role being assumed by one of the federated identity. So federated identity could be one of the identity that must be residing in your Active Directory, Microsoft Active Directory environment, and which is basically assuming the role, Okta ADM role. So in order to log in the AWS environment and carrying out the subsequent activities, right? So in the fourth case, you can see again, so in this particular case, it is quite clear. You can see the IAM here. We are definitely talking about the permanent credential here, or the long-term credentials. We are talking about IAM user here. So CloudSploit is one of the IAM user in our AWS environment, so this is how this is why user identity ARN is one of the field which you might be interested in, because you can easily make a distinction whether it is a federated identity or it is an AWS service, or your user identity, for example, your IAM user, right? Somebody is using the IAM or somebody is trying to assume a role in your AWS environment. So it gives you enormous amount of visibility. So understanding that is quite important. So I will also try to look some other fields if they are important, and then we will go from there. Also want to emphasize on user identity type. I think we discussed about those. So assumed role, it might be your AWS service principal might be assuming in role. Your federated identity might be assuming your role. It could be like that as well. And obviously IAM user, we talked about IAM user. So IAM user is nothing but one of the user account which is existing in your AWS environment. Things of that nature. So let's move ahead. So now I think we understand pretty much, and how does the logs look like, in the CloudTrail logs look like. So now we can start running some of the searches. So if I go here and so for example, first of all, let's say we really want to have, just give me a sec. So this is the basic query which will give you a little bit of the visibility. So for example, the analyst might want to know what might be happening in the environment. So I am grouping the event names or the activities which are being carried out by the user identity ARN, user identity.type, and let's say I also want to group by the AWS account. So let's say user identity.account. IT. So it should basically give me the desired result. So let's try to run this query. It will take a moment. So you can again see, so it's again very, very important. So for example, the events, the table is getting populated, and we are grouping by the user identity ARN, user identity type, and this is the AWS account. And you can see the count of the events which are taking place corresponding to the very first row, right? So, for example, so what we have talked about previously, right? So very first thing you can see that, this is the role that is being assumed, Kubernetes admin, and is assumed by the entity, which is the extremely large random number, right? In the second case, again, auto scaling is the entity, and in the third case, you can again see that the role is being assumed by the federated identity, and it has carried out the activities like, which are the read-only activities, describe security groups, describe subnets, VPCs. So let's say if you really want to eliminate the noise here, and we are a little more concerned about, so for example, we are only concerned about the activities which are write only, or which might be making some kind of the modifications. So I will be making a little change to my base search. So let's say, I really don't want to look at the events which start from the describe, list, and get, right? So let's run the search once again, and hopefully it will filter out some of the noise for us, right? So again, you can see that now, so this is the activity being performed by the one of the IAM user, and you can see the username here. And so these are the activities: allocate address, associate address. You can see that all the noise has been eliminated from here on, and there are only the write events which are basically which might correspond to some of the configuration changes or creation of the resources in your AWS environment, right? So this is how you should do it, and you can again see the activities corresponding to this federated identity principle: create alias, create key, network ACL, and things of that nature. Here you can see the creation of the security group, terminate instances, generate credential report. So let's move on to some other query as well, right? In this particular case, this query is not really different from what we really looked at, but so for example, we did not really group by our time. So let's try to do that. So for example, if and I will be making some of the changes. So for example, let's also group by time, let's say, and so here I need to make a little bit of the changes. So eval minus time, and here let's say minus time, and let's remove the next row here. So this will give me the visibility. So we are also trying to group by the time so that we know when this particular event has happened, because this is very, very important as well. So you can see the timestamps corresponding to those events as well, right? So similarly, you can also bucket the events as per the timestamp, let's say 10 minutes duration or things of that nature. And so one of the things that I would like to emphasize here is because you cannot really comprehend, this particular time might be in which particular time zone. So normally it is in the, so for example, let's say, let's also try to make some of these small amendments so that we will get to know what is the time zone. So let's say I will be making small changes so that I will get to know that. So results might be getting in a second. So this is my local environment. That is why you can see, so the time zone corresponding to this event is Indian Standard Time. So this basically makes little bit clear. You can also make a use of small z in place of the capital Z. So that is just that just basically changes the way it is being represented on your user interface, right? So let's also try to get into some other queries as well. So I think deadup is not something which we might be interested in. So this talks about multi-values. So let's talk about the create policy version command. So this is one of the tactic we might want to discuss. So some of the base queries, and then let's say I will just make small changes to my source type. So here in this particular query, I'm only looking for the events which are getting originated from IAM as a service, and I am basically filtering out. I am only concerned about the event name, which is create policy version. So I will not give you very detailed here, but all the AWS folks might be knowing this event name, might correspond to, privilege escalation as a tactic. And because people often make use of this particular event name, to create a policy which is even more permissive as compared to their current policy, and they might try to assume the role. So let's run this particular command so that we can talk a little bit more about this. So it might take a moment. So I'm getting the results maybe in a second. So yeah, I think I can see there is only one event correspond to the event name create policy version. You can see this command is being carried out by the principal, which is IAM user, name is Rhino escalate. You can see the user agent is AWS CLI. If I will look at the policy document, then you might get to know something. So for example, you can see the policy which is being created here. The name of the policy is Rhino escalate. And you can see the policy document, and the people who might have a little bit of experience in reading and creating the JSON documents, which that also might come in picture. So if you can see that the action is star, so that does mean that if you attach this particular policy to one of the user principal, you might be able to perform all the actions correspond to all the resources. So in the SID statement also you can see that allow everything. So you might want to be little conscious of the activities like this. This might be suspicious, this might be legitimate, might be intended, or might be unintended. But the thing is, you really want to reach out to these stakeholders who have carried out these activities to validate whether these are suspicious or legit, right? So things of that nature, and we will be demonstrating these kind of activities like privilege escalation in our subsequent part of the videos, or some of the boot camps, free boot camps, where we might want to look at the red teaming and blue teaming exercises with respect to AWS IAM service using one of the open source project. So just follow this space if you really if you are interested in that particular things of that nature as well. So let's move on to the another query, and this time we will be looking at create access keys. So for example, so people might be knowing create access key is one of the event that basically corresponds to the creation of your access keys, which also resemble your long-term credentials or permanent credentials, your access key and the secret access key. So most of the time in the enterprise environment, people might be making the use of STS as a service in order to generate the temporary tokens, and that will pretty much get expired in no more than 36 hours. So that is a good practice, and people normally assumes federated rule or something else, but they definitely make the use of temporary credentials. That is a good practice. So create access key is something you are basically creating the permanent or the long-term credentials, and therefore it is very, very important to have the understanding of the standards of your enterprise environment, which dictates whether you should make the use of the permanent credentials or temporary credentials. But more often than not, it is recommended to make the use of the temporary credentials. So this is the event which you might be interested in. So you can see that this is the user identity. This is one of the user account which has created one more access key. And you can see the access key. This is the access key. So you might be knowing that the key which starts with the AK, that basically resembles the permanent credentials. And normally the temporary credentials basically start with the A and S, right? So you can see that, again, so these are some of the attributes, so we have created the access key and username. You can see the atomic red team. This is the username which has been created. And there might be some of the policies which might be getting attached to this particular user, which might be even more permissive as compared to the user which has carried out this activity. And therefore, it might also imply the privilege escalation. But we will definitely get into the more details and understand in more details in the subsequent parts. But this is just the introductory demonstration of the things which you might want to do while you leverage CloudTrail in your Splunk environment, right? So you can also look at the activities which are being performed by the, let's say, so for example, it is also recommended that so just give me a sec. So I also know that this particular data which I am leveraging as of now, that this does not really have any kind of the data which corresponds to the root user login. So for example, user identity dot type is equal to root. So this is how you basically look for all the activities which are carried out by a root account. And AWS always recommends do not use root if it is necessary. You only use for some of the activities and in the exceptional cases, but not other than that. So there is really no event corresponding to that in my data, but that is also one of the good examples. You really want to keep an eye on these kind of the events as well. So similarly, you can also look for the events, whether the MFA multi-factor authentication is used or not. I will try to demonstrate in some other examples later this time. So let's also take an example of the open security groups as well, right? So just let me make the changes in the source type. So here we are basically looking at the security groups which are created, and therefore the security groups are basically allowing access to the entire internet. All we are talking about all the zeros. Click on that particular button, it will take a moment. So we are basically looking for the security groups which might have the inbound rules which might be open to the internet at the port number 22, which corresponds to SSH, and port number 3389, which corresponds to the RDP, right? So that is one of the thing which we want to talk about. I have just clicked on that particular event so that we might want to so we might be having little bit more detail about that particular event, and it might just populate in a moment. So you can see all this example, this particular account in which this activity has been carried out. Event source is nothing but EC2. So let's request parameters. I will go to the IP permissions, items, and items. You can see the port number from port is 3389. If I go to the IP ranges and IP ranges, you can see the CIDR IP is all the zeros. So it is not really a very good practice, right? If you really enabling the RDP port, you really want to restrict it to your corporate network at least, right? Or public IP CIDR range, which basically corresponds to your corporate network. Or maybe your private IP range, which basically correspond to your VPC at least, right? You can log down even further, but at least you should do like things like those, So this might be an example of the policy violation, with respect to the standards in your environment. So I want to highlight those as well. And similarly, so for example, you might want to look for the events, like failed logins from which particular countries. So we can also make a use of those. But however, just give me a sec. So for example, if you really want to look for the failed logins, you can use something like this. And here, let's say star. So you can look like this, but however in my data there are no events correspond to the field logins, and therefore it will not retrieve any results. So I will eliminate this particular thing, and now we might want to look at all the activities which might be taking place from which of the countries, right? And let's say sort minus count as well, right? So in a minute, it might just give you a result in a moment. So let's wait for that. So you can see that, so these are the countries. You can see the activities are being carried out from United States, Germany. So it might also give you a little bit of the visibility from which of the countries the activities are being carried out, right? So this is what I want to demonstrate as a part of this this particular video, and I would recommend to check the video description and hit me up on the Telegram or my email, in terms of, for example, if you are really interested in setting up this kind of the environment or need some kind of the help or to play around in this kind of the environment, please feel to reach out. We will try to do some of the boot camps, and we will try to invite some of the participations, for the people who might be interested in the activities like this. So thank you guys. Thank you,